Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of After Wednesday. I am your host, Jeffrey Hayes. So good to be back with you. The last few days have been balmy. It's been nice here in January. Feeling pretty good about things. Also feeling really good about tonight's guest. I am honored to have on the program tonight, from deep in the heart of Texas, Donny Cates.
Very good.
How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing very, very well.
No, that has stuck with me since I was a child and the first time I ever saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I love that moment when he's on the payphone. She's like, "Where are you?" And they do that little bit. It's been with me my whole life.
Yeah, that's actually entirely true. It's Pavlovian. We can't not do it. If you're ever gonna be in a fight in Texas, just do that, and everyone will drop their guns and just start clapping. You'll be fine.
And then they'll hug it out and just realize that, hey, what was all that about?
Well, Texans don't hug. That's actually a myth.
Oh, that is a myth. Okay, so King of the Hill totally lied. All right.
No, we don't hug.
I'm so happy to have Donny Cates here with us tonight. If you're tuning in tonight live on Google Plus, I do have the question and answer app enabled, so please feel free to ask questions, and I will shoot them along and ask Donny as they come up. I'm going to jump right into it with you. I have a question for you here.
Okay.
We were talking a little bit before the show, and I was reading up on you this past week. You're in Texas. You're in Austin. You're down there in the Southwest, and you apparently, according to the news story I read, you worked in a number of comic book shops. What was that experience like?
It was great, man. Yeah, I grew up in. Speaking of King of the Hill, I'm actually from the town that King of the Hill is based on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from a town called Garland, which Arland.
Oh, okay.
That's where Mike Judge went to high school. He went to the same high school as me. Just to roundabout not really answer your question. I grew up in Dallas. I'm not actually from Austin. And then I moved out here, and I was a cook for a long time. And then I got this gig. I didn't own these shops, but I ran one specifically here in Austin, and then I kind of helped run 3 others.
Mm-hmm.
They were great, man. It was fantastic. Honestly, if I hadn't participated in running those into the ground, I would still probably be doing that. It was something that it's something that I still kind of think about today, and I think it's really helped me in my newest job thing. I don't know what the hell you'd call this thing I do. As a former retailer and stuff, it really helps you. I don't know. I try and make sure that every comic I write is worth someone's $4.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know what that's like to work there and have that kind of community. That I think something that comic book shops are not really doing as much these days is like forming like a little barbershop community and getting to hang out and talk about comics and be 8 years old but be an adult. It was amazing. I really hopefully I'll Mark Wade this whole thing and buy my own shop someday.
Well, I was talking a few months ago. I was talking to Malachi Ward, who is still working I believe he works at Secret Headquarters in Los Angeles, and he also does his own books. And I asked him, and you just sort of touched on it. I want you, if you could, elaborate on it a little bit more. Sort of, what did talking to people who bought comics and just had obviously the same sort of passion that you do, how did that help you when you finally said, "Fuck it"? I want to sit down and I want to start writing and doing my own?
Well, okay. So I was running those shops from I was running them right when Civil War was coming out, which is a fantastic time to be in a shop. There's so many cool comics and really cool stuff going on. But I honestly never thought that I could do that. It's not that I didn't think I could. It's just that the thought had literally never occurred to me to even do it. I was never passionate about writing or about creating and stuff. I've been an artist my whole life, and I briefly flirted with the idea of being able to draw, but I'm I'm just not very good, not good enough, rather. And it was really only when the shops all closed down that I didn't have what you would call hireable skills. And so I kind of started, I started thinking, maybe I could do this. Like maybe I could write a story. Like I've read enough of these stories. I know, I think most people who have read comics for their entire life, and I've been reading since I was able to read. I think after a while you get an innate sense of timing and pacing and what works, and of course there's things to learn. There's always going to be things to learn, but I thought I could do it, but I only ever started writing. I wrote my first script in my entire life in 2007. And from there, it was really, honestly, it was just writing things that I was really attracted to in comics, and what I've always been attracted to. And I understand that I write some pretty dark shit, but I was always really attracted to like really funny stuff, like really lighthearted stuff. And so, like the first book I wrote was called The Soviet Nunchuck, and it was about this giant like Russian mob enforcer. It's like 7 feet tall. He's like 500 pounds, and he like. Well, you know what? I just stopped myself. I can't tell you about it because that character is going to be in a book that I'm writing for Dark Horse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's actually in my ongoing that comes out next September. But yeah, that was the first character I ever came up with. There's this big, dumb ninja Russian dude. And I actually found a way to put him into a book, which is awesome. But yeah, I just, coming back to like having fun in comic shops. Like we would always sit around, and I would have people over in the comic shops. We had chairs and couches and stuff, and just talking to people about what works and what kind of doesn't sometimes and stuff like that. I guess really just that sense of community and thinking about just I don't know. It's a cheesy answer, but that's that sense of community. And like when I write now, I get a real big kick out of on Twitter seeing that same kind of thing play out. People talking about something that I wrote and having that same sense of fun. I guess to make this way longer. I think everyone can tell when the creators of a comic book are having fun. I think if you pick up like Silver Surfer by Dan Slott, it is so apparent on every line and every piece of dialogue that those guys are just having a blast.
Yeah.
And that's something that even if I'm writing about some really, really dark stuff and everything, I feel like that's something I always try and bring is that sense of fun, because comics should be fun, right?
Right. And I want to say that your work, and as I was reviewing Buzzkill and the Ghost Fleet this past week, getting ready for this, it really struck me that you have an excellent sense of balance between that darkness and the lightness, and making it all sort of blend very well and be very entertaining. And I sort of, when I was thinking about it and making some notes on it, I kind of began to think, well, I think he's balancing this because you have just a really strong sense of character development. It seems to be very important to you in your work. What sort of informs your development of character? For example, someone like Black.
Dr. Black? Well, Dr. Black is there was actually a deleted line in Buzzkill that never made it to a trade or anything. There was a great scene where, I think it's great because I wrote it, but there's a scene where someone asks him what his background is, like where do you come from, and he just flat out says, Donny just brought me into the book to make it funny because this whole thing's kind of dark. And he's and I really love Black because when you're reading Buzzkill, that book would have been a very different book if you didn't have someone to occasionally walk in and point out, look how ridiculous this all is. You know,
Right.
like look at how silly that this is. And like there's a way to do really, really silly, really, you know, overwrought things in comics. And I often find that a way to do it is just to be completely honest about it. Just be honest about what you're doing, and sometimes having a character just point at it and go, "Look at this dumb thing," is really fun. Dr. Black, Buzzkill was a really hard thing for me to write. I mean, it's very it's personal in a lot of ways. It was also like the first thing I ever wrote, and so like kind of, you know, it's set in superhero tropes. It's set in, you know, it's got goofy elements to it, and I guess looking back on it, like those were all big protective comfy coats that I could put on to make the really personal part of it, the really dark part of that, be okay. And I've, you know, as far as character, I've always felt like the character that I respond to the most in comics has always been Peter Parker. And I think a big part of his appeal is that you get to laugh with Peter. You know, you don't laugh at Peter. I mean, he's a dork and, you know, he's a nerd and stuff, but the joke is very rarely on Peter. You get to laugh with him. And I've always thought that if you can get your audience to laugh with someone, then they will cry with them. They will cry with them that easier, you know? And so, and like everyone's funny, man. Like even, you know, I mean, you know, everyone has that goofy side, and like even in Ghost Fleet, like the two main characters are these like hardened professionals and stuff, but they're also two dudes who have been working together forever and share a car. And I've been around a lot of dudes in working jobs and stuff, and you make jokes, like you fuck around a lot, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think that humor is not only important to just to writing as so much as like, oh, you want to put some jokes in here. I think that humor is a fundamental like building block of humanity and of character. And yeah, there's a way to write a character who is completely humorless for sure. But yeah, I guess that's how I approach it. I don't really know. I mean, I get to know characters really, really, really well, to the point that I get really upset about doing cruel things to them. Obviously, I don't have that big of a problem because I do it often. But yeah, like Ruben, you know, from Buzzkill, that's a character that will always stay with me. You know, he lived inside of me for a very, very, very long time. It still does in a lot of ways. You know.
Were your work on Buzzkill is complicated because you have this, again, this really fantastically entertaining story with some very real themes of struggle and addiction and maturation, and it really, man, reminded me of like early Chuck Palahniuk work. And, you know, did you spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, these things like AA groups and how people cope and how people come together to meet and deal with things?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, so I worked on that book with my buddy Mark Rez, who is the drummer of the band The Toadies. Have you ever heard of The Toadies?
Oh, yeah.
And Rez and I had about 1 billion meetings of just sitting down, ironically over drinks, and really, because like there's a really, really easy way to tell that story, and the easy way is to make it really broad and really goofy, and like, look at how drunk this guy gets, isn't that hilarious? And something that we kind of decided early on was like, you and your buddies getting drunk and like doing goofy stuff, that is hilarious, no doubt. But someone who is like suffering from this disease, is not. It's not funny even a little bit. And the very last thing that we wanted to do, and the thing that was the forefront on our minds, was we didn't want anyone who had lost someone to it or had gone through it to think that we were making light of it or making fun of it in any way. And so I actually went to a bunch of AA meetings and sat in on them. And I was very honest about it. I asked everyone beforehand, like, hey, can I sit in on this and everything? And everyone was really, really cool, you know? And people would tell me stories, and some of those stories informed it, you know, but really what informed it was building that character, our main character, who is not, I mean, he's a good person at heart, but just unfortunately doesn't do the right thing a lot of the time. I mean, the first time you meet him, he stares the audience in the face and lies right to their face, and continues to lie to them the entire time. The last line that he says to his girlfriend about how he got his powers from love is an absolute bold-faced lie. And that sucks. And is that the hero that we want? No, but that's who he is. That's who that character is. And for that book to wrap up with him like figuring out like how to be sober and figuring it out would have been such a disrespectful and very untruthful story. Unfortunately, it was only ever going to end like that for him. And it is really complicated because in the end he did save the world, but he did relapse, you know. So it is very complicated, you know.
What sort of you talked about how you begin to really become emotionally invested in your characters. What was your writing process like? I mean, when you were working on Buzzkill, how many hours a day were you really putting into it?
Oh God, man, it consumed me. I mean, let's see. The first issue came out. What year is it right now? The first issue came out September 15th, 2013. I think that's right. I wrote the first draft of the first issue in 2011. And I mean, this story had been sitting, and the thing is, the kind of complicated version of it is that when we pitched it, it was going to be a 12-issue series, with each of those issues representing one of the steps in the 12 steps, you know. And Dark Horse, you know, with me being a no-name writer, you know, at that point, and you know, still to this point, they gave me 4, you know, and so we had to cram a lot of story into 4 issues, and ultimately I think it's such a better book for it. I really, really do. And yeah, I mean, it took the craziest thing about that book is that, and it has not happened to me since then. I really wish that it had. Every single word that you see in that book was my first draft. I didn't end up rewriting a word of any of those 4 issues, but that's because we had spent a year sitting down and breaking the story. Before a single page was scripted, we knew how it was going to end. We knew every single beat. And that's something that you have the time to do when you're not published and writing you're not writing 4 monthly books like I am now. And that's, man, it was great. And it was such a liberating process, and I was turning in these scripts to my first-time editors, and my editor, Patrick Thorpe, who I now have worked with a number of times, who's amazing, and like just getting like, no notes, these are great. I was like, well, I have this thing totally figured out. This will be smooth sailing from now on. And then, and then, you know, Buzzkill did really, really well, much to kind of everyone's surprise. People really enjoyed it, which was fantastic. What that also meant was that Dark Horse would very much like for me to write some more things immediately. And so, you know, that level of love and care and shaping every smooth line and making it as streamlined as possible, you know, you find yourself in that way, I work more hours on scripts now than I did on that book, but it's because I had 4 issues spread out over 2 years to make perfect, you know. But yeah, man, it was everything I lived and breathed for like a year and a half.
How did you learn how to write a script?
I actually, boy, one of these days when I'm confident enough, I will reprint the first script I ever wrote, having no idea like what a comic book script looked like, which is hilarious. I mean, it's so just bananas, the things that I was asking for. But then, yeah, so like when in 2007 or 8 or so, when the comic book shops shut down, I had a friend who was going to an art school in Savannah called the Savannah College of Art and Design, SCAD, and he told me about they're the only art school in the country that you can get an accredited degree in sequential art.
Okay.
And so I just went and did that because I was very, very, very serious about it. I was going to do this thing or I was going to die trying. So I went out there with the very foolish notion that I was going to learn how to draw for Marvel Comics, and then I got out there, and the guys that I was in class with, I was in class with Trad Moore.
Okay.
I was in class with Jeff Shaw, who drew Buzzkill and is drawing my ongoing. I was in class with actually Patrick Reynolds, who does a bunch of stuff for Dark Horse, and he just did the Aliens, what's it called, Fired and Stone, for them. He was actually my TA. Sean Murphy had gone there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I quickly got into a class and saw my art, and then I saw Trad Moore's art, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna write. I'm just gonna pack up these art supplies and figure out how to write. So I did that, and yeah, I took a bunch of classes there with my mentor, this guy named Mark Neese, who's incredible. And yeah, I mean that was a really labor-intensive class where he would ask you what's your big story? Like, what's the story you've always wanted to tell? And at the time, mine was Ghost Fleet, actually. Like, way back in the day, I already had the idea for Ghost Fleet. And he was just like, how many issues do you see that book being? And I was like, ongoing, forever, like Preacher. And he was like, okay, tell me the entire story in 1 page.
Yeah.
And then if you did that good enough, he would give you 2 pages, and then 3, and then 4, and you would work up to a full issue. So by the time I got my first gig at Dark Horse, which was actually in Dark Horse Presents, and they said, it's going to be an 8-page story. I was like, 8 pages? That's a fucking lifetime. I can do anything in 8 pages, And so just from there, I mean, yeah, I mean, you do something enough and get screamed at enough that you're doing it wrong, you eventually figure it out. And the crazy thing is, I'm still figuring out.
Yeah.
I mean, I am insanely fortunate and lucky that my first jobs are at Dark Horse. And, I know a lot of cats who work up from way smaller publishers, and by the time they get to Dark Horse or Image or Vertigo or any of that stuff, they've kind of worked out their style and stuff. And I'm, fortunately and unfortunately, I'm learning in front of all of you. And so far so good. People seem to dig it, but man, am I due for a crappy book. I'm definitely gonna fail soon. I promise. I hope not, but everyone writes a stinker once in a while.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I mean, but it could only be for a single issue. How about a one-shot? Just write a crappy one-shot, and that way you can,
yeah,
move on to all the better series.
I'm on it. Yeah. Soviet Nunchuck #1.
There you go. So, my guest tonight, who's being very self-confident, is Donny Cates. If you're joining us, or if you've been listening and you're hanging out with us on Google Plus tonight, please feel free to ask a question. The Q&A app is enabled. I want to ask you about what were the writers, or who were the writers that influenced you?
Man, this is always such a tough question, and people have asked me this a lot, and I don't know. This is more of that self-confidence thing. I always feel weird, like, I always feel weird answering it because I don't want to compare myself to people who are incredible. But I'll answer it a different way because I don't want to compare my stuff to people who are good at what they do. I will say, like, growing up and stuff, I mean, it's hard to go wrong with something that Mark Waid writes. You know, I mean, Mark Waid, there's a reason he's been in the industry for so long, and there's a reason that, like, he's kind of at the top of his game, like, right now. You know, I mean, this is the guy who wrote Kingdom Come.
Right.
I mean, how old is Kingdom Come? Like 15 years old? Something like no, it didn't come out in 2000. It came out like the 90s, right? So it's like 20 years old.
Yeah, I think so.
And you go and read Kingdom Come, and it's just like, and I have every version of it that's ever been printed. I have every issue. I have the original trade and the reprint, and I have the absolute one. And it's a book that I'll reread every year. And every time I crack it open, I'm just like, man, fuck this. I quit. Like, I'm just never gonna be this good, just ever, you know. And then you fast forward to, you know, his current stuff at Marvel. And he's just killing it. I mean, he's got, you know, there's a lot of guys who have been in the industry for a long, long time who you can pick up their comic and not that it's bad at all, but you can tell that they're maybe from a different generation of comic book writing. You know, they do things a little bit differently, you know. But you pick up anything that Mark Waid has done in the past fucking 15 years, and it is fresh as a daisy. I mean, it is current, it is modern, it's hip as shit, and it's just cool and inventive, and he's still, like, breaking stuff. He's amazing. The other guy that Jason Aaron. Jason Aaron is a guy who I continuously almost just don't want to read his stuff because it just makes me feel awful. Like, every issue of Southern Bastards, as I close it, I both want to hug it and throw it across the room and scream like I'm from the fucking South too. Why didn't I think of that? That's brilliant. He is. There's, and I, you know, take this for what it's worth, or take it in the way it's intended, I should say. You know, like, there's really well executed meals that have, like, exotic foods and, like, really well done, like, you know, placement and, like, really fancy stuff, right? Like, really expensive meals. And then there's maybe nothing better in the world than, like, a fresh piece of, like, corn on the cob with just a little bit of salt. And it's not fancy, but it's perfect. And Jason Aaron does that in his comics. Like, Southern Bastards is not a premise that blows your doors off. It's not like, wow, that's the most creative idea I've ever heard for a book. But it is fucking perfect at what it does. There's no one who does what Jason Aaron does better than Jason Aaron. And that is incredible because he does the exact same thing on things like Thor, which are these crazy, huge ideas. They're like, you know, Simonson run ideas, but it's still so relatable and simple and perfect. And that's something, he has such a, what's the word? Like, he uses words very succinctly, not how I'm doing right now. But he chooses his language very, very well and uses them like a very sharp sword. And it's something that I am working on. I can be too verbose sometimes in interviews and in comic books.
not at all. By the way, Kingdom Come 1996. It's been almost 20 years.
Oh my God, that's incredible. I mean, yeah. Everyone, stop listening to this podcast. Sorry, Jeff, and go read Kingdom Come because it's brilliant. Yeah.
I've got the image, one of the beautiful Alex Ross images, up on the screen for everyone right now. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kingdom Come is one of those things you've at least got to crack open once in your life. And I think it's interesting too. What I admire about Waid, and what I really, we were talking about how he's burning it up at Marvel. Man, there was nothing better on the shelves than when that first Daredevil issue hit. And
There's still not. There's still nothing on the stands when a new issue of that book drops.
mm-hmm.
There's nothing that competes. I mean, Chris Samney. Let's not.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
let's not. I mean, yeah, because that dude is doing things in cartooning that are. Oh God, he's so good. They. Earlier when we were talking about how you can tell when a creative team is just having fun,
Yeah.
Daredevil is the quintessential that book. He's not trying to reinvent that character. He's like dug down and found out who Matt is, and is just riding the wheels off of it. Him and Samney are just taking this very basic, clear, pure vision of that character and just doing the best that maybe anyone has ever done.
Yeah.
And it's always great because I'm a comic book geek first and foremost before I'm a writer or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It is always so great to me when you can tell that you're living in the time of a perfect run on something.
Yeah.
Like people who are maybe a little bit older than me will talk about Simonson's Thor and how
Sure.
that was
Sure.
just a perfect run.
Mm-hmm.
And what Wade is doing with that book, and what Slott is doing on Spidey, it's
Yes.
just like we're living in an age of marvels, my
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah, there has now been multiple shows that Dan Slott's name has now been mentioned, along with my own constant urging of people. It's just like the man bleeds Spider-Man,
Oh
and he was
yeah.
born to write Spider-Man, and we don't ever really want him to stop writing Spider-Man.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. The Spideyverse or the Spider-Verse stuff is strong. I mean, it's super strong. And it's like bringing this new element into Spider-Man that you don't really see a lot. And like on paper, if someone told you, okay, one of the dopest Spider-Man comics of all time is going to be like a billion Spider-Mans versus like an evil version of the Eternals or the of like the Sandman gallery. Like
Right.
it's gonna be like Sandman, but like evil versus like a billion Spider-Men. Like on paper, well, you know what? Now that I'm saying it out loud, of course that would work. That sounds amazing, and it is amazing. It's so great. Yeah, he really gets Peter Parker in a way that a lot of other writers. He's a hard character to write, I mean, him and Superman, I feel like, I think it's hard to have something in Superman's way that's a challenge to him.
Uh-huh.
And with Peter Parker, I think it's just the direct opposite. It's hard to have Peter have a good day,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's hard to present something that won't just crush him. And the reason why both those characters work is they both keep going.
Yeah.
And it's more incredible when Peter does it because he so often gets smashed. And yeah, like I find myself reading Spider-Verse and like for the first time in years, putting down a comic book and being like, oh no, like what's he gonna do? Like what? Like it's like I'm 12 again, and I'm just like, oh no, a clone. What's he gonna do now? Like I am so in. I'm so in with what Slott's doing.
As we're sitting here and chatting just about comics in general, I get the feeling that comics sort of shaped your idea of storytelling more so than any other medium. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, man. My dad taught me how to read using comic books. When I was a little bitty baby, my brother was super in. He's older than me. He was into sports cards, and there was a store in the mall that sold sports cards. They also sold comics, and I remember going in there, and I remember like begging my dad to buy me this issue of Green Lantern, and I think I only wanted it because it was colorful, right? And he basically said, if you'll learn how to read it, I'll get it for you. And I did. And so I basically learned how to speak comic book before I learned how to speak like human language. And so, and so, yeah, I mean, I have pretty much never missed a week at the comic book shop. You know, unfortunately, the thing that no one tells you when you start doing this job as a real job is that you don't really have time to read comic books anymore, even though people give you them for free all the time, which is rad as hell. And also, like, you know, like I try and like I'll use comics as like a reward system now. Like I'll finish a script and then I'll read comics because I am so connected to storylines and like the vibe of comics, like the general, you know, feeling that they have, that I'll reread a script and go, oh, that's just the same vibe as that Buffy the Vampire Slayer book that you read the other day. Like you just wrote a Buffy the Vampire Slayer issue of Ghost Fleet. You have to rewrite that. And so, like, yeah, I'm very easily influenced, so I have to put them away and then read them again, and then in the case of Jason Aaron things, maybe not read them so that I keep on working.
It sounds like too. So do you think you have a the same sort of admiration that, say, Grant Morrison has, who will go as far as to state that superheroes can save us all?
Man. Whew. Yeah, I guess I could take some more acid. Sure. Was that your question? I feel like that was your question.
Maybe.
Yes, man, absolutely. Like, I don't drink anymore, but there was definitely a time in my life where you got a couple of drinks in me, and I would extol the virtues of how this whole planet can be saved on the backs of Peter Parker and Clark Kent. Absolutely. I read Super Gods, and I mean, I'll say this. Part of the reason that I really want to do I really love doing my creator-owned books. It's so much fun because no one can tell me I'm wrong, which is cool. But I really want to work on a Marvel or a DC, and not for any reason that you might think, not for the fucking career or for anything else, but simply because when you write those characters, you're putting your feet into an infinity pool. You know, like your footprints are on the fucking moon, and they're gonna be there forever. These characters have been around before I was born, and they will live longer after I die. And if you really, like, if you want me to get real Morrison on you, if you look at, let's say, my impact on this world versus the impact that Peter Parker has had on this world, I would be hard-pressed for you to tell me that he's any less real than I am. If you look at the total amount of hearts that we've both touched, Peter Parker is way more real than you or I. You know?
That's true.
And there's something about that is kind of solely exists in comic books, and it's something that is fascinating and brilliant and beautiful, that your name is etched into a giant stone tablet, and at the beginning of that tablet it reads Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, and at the end of it, who fucking knows? But somewhere in the middle, you'll be there, and you'll be there forever, and that's amazing and beautiful. And to that degree, yeah, man, I dig on that shit.
To transition a little bit here to talk about your creator-owned work over at Dark Horse, with your new book, The Ghost Fleet. I brought up the second issue here, the cover of the second issue for folks to get a look at. The Ghost Fleet is kind of personal for me, man, because my father drove a flatbed truck for 30 years.
Wow, and, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I sort of know that whole culture in the industry and the mindset of trucks, and I've showered in too many truck stops in my life to be healthy. I'm sure I retired those flip-flops long ago.
I think if you shower there once, that's already unhealthy.
Yeah.
That's one too many times.
but man, they give you the free shower when you fill up the truck.
Hey man, I ain't arguing with you.
What I want to ask you a little bit about this because I was chatting to my dad about the book, and he was like, "Really?" He says, He's like, "That's pretty fucking cool." I was just like, "Yeah, it is pretty fucking cool." What 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 sort of led you to this story?
Oh boy. Our Lord and Savior Kurt Russell. Yeah, I mean,
So we're going to talk John Carpenter then, is that right?
yeah. If Russell is Jesus, then Carpenter is God. Yeah. I grew up with that shit, man. Like, my dad was a trucker, and
cool.
his dad was a trucker, and his dad was not a particularly good man, but apparently he was a legendary trucker. So I was really always attracted to that whole lifestyle, and I have a big soft spot in my heart for Tango and Cash and Big Trouble in Little China and Over the Top, and Smokey and the Bandit, and that kind of weird era in entertainment where truckers were action heroes.
Yeah.
Which was a really cool trend that died out. And yeah, you know what the coolest thing about Ghost Fleet is to me, is that people are getting what I'm trying to do in that book, because I'm definitely on purpose trying to make it into a John Carpenter film. Like, it is goofy and it is over the top, no pun intended. It's absurd, it's silly, but it's also got these badass action scenery, and huge explosions where explosions may not really belong. And there's a way to do that where you just end up writing a crappy book, right? There's a way to do that where people don't kind of get the joke, where you're doing it on purpose and they just think that you're doing kind of a schlocky, kind of a crappy comic, right? And that was like my biggest fear going into that, because it is such a radically different direction from Buzzkill. I don't think really anyone was expecting for this to be my sophomore effort. I don't know, because it's really different. But man, people get it. Like, all the reviews and people on Twitter and stuff, they get it. They really understand the tone and like what it's supposed to be about. And that's the coolest thing to me, is that like-minded people have found this book and understand it and are finding all the little jokes. It's a blast to write, and my artist Daniel Johnson is phenomenal, and the only person on earth, I think, who could have done this book, because he finds humor in the weirdest places that are not in my script at all. My favorite example of it is in the first issue. There's the big splash page, right, where the truck runs over the guy and like breaks him into a million pieces. The very next page, if you look closely, Daniel has the windshield wipers going on the truck, and it's like wiping off gore and blood, and he added little sound effects that say wipe, 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 wipe. And like, that is brilliant, and it really, like, if this book was taken really seriously in the art and like really, really, overwrought and serious, it wouldn't work. It really, really wouldn't work. But with Daniel on it, adding this, Daniel is the best artist to do a very visual, like looking into the camera and winking, and being like, "Hey, we're in on the joke too. We know that this is goofy," Yeah, it's a blast. I love it. I've actually wrapped on it. I'm done writing it, and I've moved on to my next ongoing, and it's nice to not live in that world anymore, because it is a very emotional book, which is surprising. I didn't set out to write an emotional book. After Buzzkill, I had 2 books that I pitched to Dark Horse. And one of them is this really goofy book that's coming out later this year, and the other one was Ghost Fleet. And I was really excited about Ghost Fleet because I wanted to just do, after Buzzkill, I wanted to do something that was just a big, dumb action film. Just like really, like a big budget action film, right? And in writing it and in talking to Daniel, who's also a great writer himself, he has a great webcomic. Daniel really kind of made me sit down and get really emotionally attached to these characters again, and I ended up writing this very emotional kind of love story, really, that was never there to begin with when I sat down to write this big action truck explosion fest. But God, am I glad it did. I'm so glad, because the characters of Trace and Ward and some other characters that you're going to meet in a couple months, I've just fallen madly in love with all of them, and I genuinely care about all of them. And it makes it really hard because things maybe don't go so great for all of them.
Yeah. Don't give anything away.
No.
Working with Daniel Warren Johnson on this book, I want to ask you sort of what is your process then in collaborating with the artist as you're writing? Is the story in this your second series, and sort of maybe what you learned from working on Buzzkill, is that, is the story very malleable, and do you give a lot of extensive notes, or is it more collaborative? How does that work?
With both Jeff, who drew Buzzkill, and Daniel, both, they were 2 guys I had never worked with before, and so I tend to I script very tightly. I'm very specific in what I want, but I only do that when I don't know who's drawing it. So like when I wrote the first issue of Buzzkill, I didn't have an artist attached, and the same thing with Ghost Fleet. But once I started seeing the pencils and the inks coming in, and seeing kind of, because every artist, and God bless them, they all should do this, they change stuff. And in changing stuff, when they come in, you start to get a feel for kind of like what boundaries are they pushing against you? Like where are they pushing away from you, and what are they adhering to? And if you're paying attention as a writer, which you should be, you'll notice that, and you can start playing to their strengths, and I start to let go a lot with Daniel especially. And I only say Daniel especially because we've just done more of this. With Buzzkill, there wasn't a whole lot of this. Like action scenes, big, long fight scenes and stuff. Daniel is just way better. He's just always going to have a better eye for it than I am. Things seem cool on paper, but then Daniel has a way of making characters move. It's always going to look cooler. And so after a couple issues, I would just get to action scenes, and I go, okay, hey, Dan, you have 5 pages. Just go fucking nuts. Do whatever you want, And you get to a point where and Daniel and I are good friends now, and Jeff and I are as well. We talk on the phone all the time, and they'll run things by me about like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this does, or this doesn't make sense here? And I don't know, some writers don't do that. And while I'm not one to criticize anyone's process at all, that seems seems so alien to me that you wouldn't talk to the guy who's making the things that you come up with into reality. Like that to me, I guess that to me is a friend. Like that's someone who is trusting you wholly that you're going to do your job that'll make them look cool, and vice versa, right? And so if this person trusts me enough to come on this journey with me, I don't understand not calling them and talking to them and collaborating with them and figuring things out, and figuring out how the best, like, what's the best route to make this book the coolest shit ever, right? And I understand that in some instances, like, it's, circumstances dictate that your script's just going to get passed on to a dude and he's just going to do it. And I understand that works a lot of the time. But while I am doing creator-owned books, that's the way I'm going to do it, because ultimately this job is fun. It's like the funnest job in the world, and that to me is the most fun part of it. You get to be 8 years old and talking to a dude who draws super good, and he's gonna draw whatever comes into your brain. Like, how fucking cool is that? Like, you have a guy who is a crazy good artist, and if you write down on a piece of paper, giant robot stomps Mars, he's gonna draw that. That's the coolest thing ever. And so why wouldn't you, like, call that dude and get to be 8-year-olds together and get paid for it? That's fucking rad, you know?
What was your experience like? You wrote a little short thing for Archer and Armstrong, didn't you?
Yeah. For Archer and Armstrong, number 25. Yeah.
What was that experience like?
The worst. No, I'm kidding. I love those guys. We have me and the guys at Valiant have a very odd relationship in that, so I interned at Marvel for a while, and a couple of my fellow interns are now the dude who's in charge of marketing over there and one of the big editors over there. So it's, man, if we were to print out our emails to each other, we'd all get kicked out of comics, because it's all just like making fun of each other, and like I'll email in like a script and they'll just write back like garbage, solid garbage, like we and like you'll like, and like the Valiant Twitter, like the guy who runs the Valiant Twitter, he'll fuck with me all the time. They did this thing, I don't know if you remember this or if you even saw it, but so Buzzkill was a 4-issue mini, right? And after the 4th issue came out, they were giving me such shit over there in a good-natured buddy way, like how, like, are you paying all these critics? Like, how the fuck does everyone like this book? This book is garbage. Like, it's like, how are you getting 10, like, this is bananas, right? And they all really liked it, but they're busting balls, right? And so Valiant puts out this tweet that says, Valiant loves Buzzkill so much that we're offering a money-back guarantee on issue 5. On issue 5, and so there's no issue 5, right?
Right.
And so Bleeding Cool, of course, Bleeding Cool runs that as an article about Valiant offers money-back guarantee on Buzzkill number 5. And so I thought it was very funny, right? And then I wake up the next day and I see on Bleeding Cool, and like Twitter is freaking out, and like Twitter is, I'm like, my phone's like blowing up. I'm like, what is going on? And I get on Bleeding Cool, and the president of Dark Horse,
Jesus,
he replied to it and said, "Joke's on them. Issue 5 is now greenlit." And I was like, did Dark Horse and Valiant just approve an issue that I'm not gonna write while I was asleep? Like, because Mike, who's the president of Dark Horse, is a fucking hilarious guy. And I think he was goofing around too, right? I don't think he was being serious, right? And so I called Mike, and I still don't know if he was joking. I still don't, because I called him and I was like, Mike, so apparently I'm doing issue 5, and he was just like, yeah, you want to do it? And I was like, no. Like, I don't know if you've read issue 4, but everyone's dead. Like that, all of them, they're just all dead. And I still don't know if he was kidding, but he was like, well, the great thing about comics is that a good writer can always figure it out. Okay, gotta go.
Oh,
And so I was freaking out, and like me and my editor were like batting it back and forth, and he was like, well, do you want to do it? And I was like, I guess I could. And like for like maybe an hour, I was like, maybe I'll just do it. Like
yeah.
maybe I'll just bring him back from the dead for no good reason. And then I was like, Donny, Donny, don't base your career on Twitter.
Yeah, there you go.
Don't give in to Twitter jokes. And so we left it dead. But it was so okay. To answer your question, that's what working with Valiant is like. they can turn your fucking life upside down with a fucking tweet.
Man.
But yeah, it was a blast. It was a super blast. It is funny to me that the thing that I wrote for Valiant was the history of Armstrong's first drink.
Mm-hmm.
And after I wrote it and I turned it in, I wrote it with my best friend, Elliot Rahal, who I wrote a bunch of Dark Horse Presents stuff with. He's actually co-writing the ongoing that's coming out in September. After I wrote it and turned it in, I was like, wait, did I just get pigeonholed as the guy who writes things about drinking? I don't want to do that. I don't. And we had also, it wasn't published, but it was actually drawn and made and everything. It got cut at the last second just for the issue, I think, just ended up being too long and something needed to get cut. It was fine, but we made a official Archer and Armstrong drinking game. And like after it got cut, I was like, oh, thank God. I cannot be the guy who wrote Buzzkill and also encouraging children to drink.
Oh my God.
I can't be both of these people. But I love Valiant. I love those guys. They make some dope comic books. I hope that we're going to be doing a thing this next year. There's lots and lots of things and ideas and stuff. We just got to wait for the winds to blow the right way for our schedules to line up. But we have some bananas ideas that we want to do. So hopefully this year we'll make it work.
Well, I hope so, and we're almost out of time. I want to ask, on the heels of good and bad advice, what sort of advice do you have for people now as you're going to conventions, and I'm sure people are approaching you on Twitter and via email and sort of asking you these sorts of questions about, what kind of advice do you have for people trying to write that first comic book script to sort of shop around?
Don't do it, man. It's impossible. Just fucking give up. I don't need the competition. Are you kidding me? Don't. It's impossible. What's funny is that, like, I heard the most, like the craziest horror stories before I broke in about how cutthroat this industry is, and like how hard it is to get editors to notice you, and everything that you always hear, right? And I realize before I say this, that I have been extraordinarily fortunate to be at the right place in the right time, but it's not as hard as everyone thinks it is. And at this point in my career, I have to think that everyone who gives that advice is literally just trying to scare people away because they don't want the competition. Like, I say, like, sincerely, because really, I'll tell you what I pretty much tell everyone. It's just like any other job. It's just like any other job in the entire world. In that, I think that the most fundamental thing that is not taught to people coming into the industry or who have questions about it, I think a lot of time and focus is put on your skills, your writing, your portfolio, all that. And I don't think a big enough focus is put on just be a good dude or a good lady and be easy to get along with. I mean, if you're running a comic book shop, right? And let's say a guy comes in and he's the most qualified comic book store worker, I don't even know what that would look like. But, but I mean, if you can stay awake for 8 hours, you can do that job.
There you go.
I'm not being disrespectful to people who work in comic book shops. I used to do it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. You're all amazing people, and I love you. But if they're the most qualified person in the world, but they're not cool to be around, then it's not going to work, man. And, like, you can have the coolest script in the world, and you could be the greatest artist in the world, but if you're not cool to be around, it's just not going to be a fun time for you. It's just really not. It's going to be really, really hard, and people are not going to return your phone calls. They're not going to return your emails, and you are going to start getting it in your head like the comic book industry is full of assholes. And a big piece of advice to anyone out there who thinks that every editor in comic books is being a dick, maybe you should look at the common denominator in all of those interactions. If everyone is being rude to you, it's probably because you're not being a chill dude. Just be polite, be cool, be courteous in emails, be on time, respond to things when people need them from you. The biggest thing for me is that, like, when I am working on a project, I know for a fact that if I'm late on anything that I do, that means that there's 5 people down the line that aren't going to get to pay their bills on time.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you're having the biggest writer's block and you're a fucking artist and blah, 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 blah. Bills need to get paid, and landlords don't give a fuck about your process.
That's right.
Be a nice guy and get your work done. And listen, hopefully in all of that, you write Kingdom Come. Hopefully. I hope that's true. But even if you don't, you'll have a more likely chance of the next time around getting that job again because you're good to work with. You know? That's my biggest advice, I guess.
And that's I absolutely agree. And you have just given me the T-shirt slogan for 2015. Your landlord doesn't give a fuck about your process. You might want to trademark that. You might want to trademark that. Get it on some shirts, man.
I steal all the time. You can have that one.
Well, can you hang out 1 second while I wrap things up?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks to my guest tonight, Donny Cates, and thank you to everyone out there who's listening and tuning in this week. Feel free to share the show via Google+, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. Every time the show is done, after we get done with the live broadcast, it automatically archives on my show YouTube page, and I go out on social media and I share the links. So please feel free to share the show as you see fit. If you want to get in touch with me on Twitter to chat about the show, chat about comics, culture, whatever's on your mind, man. I'm usually pretty open. You can contact me at JLDPROD2002. If you'd like to chat with Donny over on Twitter, he is at Don Cates, DONCATES. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
All right. So again, thank you so much for taking time out this week to come on the show. Thank you to everyone for listening. We're back in 2 weeks with Charles Forsman. I hope everybody can tune in then too. Until next time, be safe, everyone.